Hi guys, I am Mary Poplin with Imagineer Systems and Boris FX, and today we're going to be going over how to do, how to use Mocha inside the PixelChooser, and also we're going to be announcing a new technology, which is Mocha Pro, the plugin. We're going to be covering a couple of topics. We're going to be covering things like how to use the BCC remove tool and Mocha in order to remove objects from a shot. We're also going over how to do color correction with Mocha masking. We're going to be going over how to do corner pins inside of your edit. We're also going to be going over things like tracking effects and particles, also beauty work. And the last thing I'm going to be showing is a preview of our remover working inside of your timeline. So, on the remove inside of Mocha Pro. All right, so there is a difference though. So Mocha, the basic version comes with BCC tools. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use the remover to remove these trash piles from this shot, because we've got this, it's kind of like a car commercial, right? And we want to make sure that we don't have this unsightly mess over here as we are supposed to be focusing on this car driving off into the distance, and this is distracting. So we're going to replace those with other things from the shot. So how we do that is we actually go into our effects panel and we go right into our BCC remover. And you can see we have this BCC remover tool. We're simply going to drag this and drop it right onto our timeline. Now, once on our timeline, what we can do is we can launch Mocha. So the cool thing about this is it actually uses the Premiere interface and the Premiere image engine in order to load this data into Mocha. So before, artists had to actually open a standalone, save the footage, and load it. Now, this is part of the BCC 10 tools. It comes with it. And you can see that it is not the full Mocha Pro. It only has the Clip tab, the Track tab, and the Adjust Track tab. And that's because this ships free with the BCC tools. So what we're going to do, let's maximize this so you can really see, is we're going to start tracking this trash pile over here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my X-spline tool and I'm going to draw a shape right around my trash pile. And somebody's got their microphone on. I would love for them to mute it, please. We're going to go ahead and track backwards. And what you'll see is that Mocha is going to follow this trash pile really nicely. We can also do things like add feathering to this as soon as we're done tracking. But what I want you to notice is that Mocha is a planar tracker. That means that it actually uses a texture to track instead of points and features. There's not a whole lot of good points and features to track here. So what we're going to do is we're using this data and we're tracking from frame 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and in that way we're actually tracking it over time. But you do notice that I started tracking at the end of the timeline. Now, the reason I started tracking at the end of the timeline is actually pretty important. I did that because when you track in Mocha, you always want to track from areas of the most detail to the least amount of detail. And I also want to point out a couple of things about understanding Mocha. So because Mocha is a planar tracker, what it does is it actually uses the surface tool as an indicator of the track. You can actually change the shape over time, but the surface tool will always follow the track. And let me just show you, to illustrate that point, we're going to come down here to the end of the shot, and I'm going to actually just move this shape somewhere else completely. What I want you to notice is that that surface tool doesn't change. Okay, the shape moves independently of the track, okay, and the surface always follows the track. So if you ever want to see if your track is accurate inside of Mocha, you need to look at the surface tool because the shape will lie to you. That being said, you can always animate the shape along with the track because the shape is a child of the track. However, it still has animation that gets applied to that. Now, since this is an X-spline tool, I want to do a couple of things to it. I want to point out that A, this is not a Bezier tool. We have Beziers right here if you like them. I don't actually like Bezier tools that much, and the reason I don't like them is because they have two handles that I have to worry about, okay? And they just aren't as easy to use for me. With X-splines, I can literally select all my points, and they work like a rope and pulley system. So I can relax for a curve, I can pull tight for corners, right? And I can alter my shapes on the fly. Now, what I actually want to do here, though, is I want to use the Uber key, because the Uber key will actually allow me to change the shape in a better way. So I'm going to use my Uber key, and we're going to go somewhere else and I'm going to start pushing my shape in. The reason I went somewhere else in my timeline is I want to make sure that this shape is not going to clip these bushes, because these bushes are actually in the foreground, just like that. All right, and the next thing I want to do right quick is I want to go to my picker tool, and I want to pick the edge. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to do some minor edge feathering. Let me turn my mask on so you can really see what we're doing. I'm going to add some minor edge feathering to this shape so that it looks really nice inside of my comp that we're making inside of our edit. All right, I'm going to turn my mats back off, and what you're going to see is that I now have this nice edge shape. Now, I want to turn my auto key back on right quick, because you can see that we actually are clipping into my bushes again, so I want to make sure when I animate the shape that it doesn't do that. So now we end up with this nice roto for this hill. So we're going to call this hill, and we're going to save this, and we're going to close it. And so now what I can do is I can go to my removal method inside of my BCC remover, and inside of this tool I can go to clone shape. All right, inside of clone shape I can select my BCC remover, and you can see I have this offset right here, and we're going to offset our little trash pile here. Let's just keep dragging this over a little bit. And what you'll see is I've now patched in that trash pile. The next thing I want to do is I actually want to remove this little U shape here, and that's because it's really dark and distracting. You see how this is no longer distracting? Let's go ahead and just click this on and off so you can see. That really patches up this hole so you're no longer looking here. So we're going to do the same thing, and it's actually this easy. We're going to take our remover tool again, we're going to drag it and drop it right onto our timeline, and you can see that that makes a second instance, okay? Really, really simply, we're going to launch Mocha. The other thing I do want to point out to you is over here in our resolution, I have this set to full. The reason I have the resolution inside of Premiere set to full is because if I do not have it set to full, Mocha's not going to be able to read the full resolution of this image, because again, what did I say? I said it's using the interface and the image engine inside of your native tools. That means that if, before a lot of users wanted to know if they could track things like MXF files, and we used to not be able to do that, but with the inclusion of Mocha tools inside of the BCC tools, because it reads the engine, we can track whatever you have in here. So we're going to go ahead and launch Mocha, and now you can see we have our patch actually visible inside of our shot. That's pretty nice. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to draw a shape right around our little U shape here. And we're going to relax that curve. I'm going to come down here. Actually, I'm going to add some edge width automatically, so we can just add an edge width as opposed to selecting inner and outer. You can see that we've now applied a little bit of a feathered edge to our shape. And now I'm going to go ahead and start tracking backwards. And again, we can turn our overlays on, turn our surface tool on, and we can really get a sense of what that track is doing. We can turn our grid on. The thing I like about turning the grid on is the grid actually shows you in detail what's happening with your surface tool. Now, we track several different parameters inside of Mocha. We track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Okay, shear and perspective you want to leave off, but because this is actually tilting in Z space, we actually want to leave them on. So if they're not present, you want to leave them off. If they are present, you want to leave them on, because they actually change the algorithm that Mocha is using to track. Now, when we're just doing a shape patch, it doesn't matter as much, but when we're doing things like corner pins, it really, really matters. And the reason for that is because corner pins need that Z depth turn in order to change what's happening. We're going to go ahead and let that finish tracking. We're tracking in large motion. I'm going to talk a little bit about manual track in our next shot, but for right now, we're going to leave it on large motion because that's what the bulk of the motion you're ever going to need to track. So now that we have this track, we can even do things like arrange our surface tool more correct to the ground plane to check this track if we like. You can see that looks really nice. It's moving in proper space. Okay, so now we just go ahead and we're going to turn our mats off, and let's turn our overlays off, and we're going to hit save and close. And again, we can just simply select our BCC remover. We select our clone shape instead of a clone spot, okay? And inside of our, our heads-up display, we're going to go ahead and take our offset, and we're going to offset this black line just like this. Excuse me, let's just make sure the road is not in there. There we are. And so now we have a nice, easy patch over these spots inside of our footage, and we end up with something that looks just like this. So that's how you use the BCC remover and how you use the Mocha tools inside of the BCC tools to create simple roto. So let's talk about something that's a little bit more complex roto, because obviously this is just a hillside. You can just draw any shape on a hillside. It's going to stick because it moves in a planar way. Well, what do you do with a multiplanar organic object? So in this case, we have this person. Now this footage is provided courtesy of Pixel Magic. This footage was courtesy of Java Post. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a color corrector. In this case, we're actually just using the BCC hue, saturation, and lightness. We're going to drop our color corrector right onto our shot. And inside of our color corrector, we're going to launch Mocha once again. So hue, saturation, and lightness. Now the BCC tools are part of the PixelChooser. So any BCC tool that in version 10, BCC version 10, that has the PixelChooser is going to have Mocha inside of it. So we're going to go ahead and launch this. And we've got some blanking here on our shot. Now, normally that's kind of a pain to deal with. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to go to our clip tab first. And inside of our clip tab, we're going to drag these yellow lines down to the border edges, because these are our clip view area, right? This is our region of interest, okay? And we're dragging these to the edges of our black clipping, and what this is going to do is this is not actually going to crop anything, but it's going to tell Mocha not to look there anymore, and so it's going to cut it out visually for us as well. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing some shapes around our guy here, because what I want to do is I want to take the saturation in his jacket down. Now, we could try to key this, but I found when I tried to key it that the jacket was a similar color to his face and hair. And since that's kind of a problem for keyers, we're going to use Roto instead. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw some loose shapes right around these arms. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. And the reason this doesn't have to be perfect is because this is actually a color correction Roto, and we're just going to do a soft mask anyway. Let's come in here and grab these sections. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm not going to grab his entire jacket together. I'm actually going to grab his waist and his top separately. And the reason I'm doing that is because it will actually track better because of the way his hips are moving. So they're moving in a separate planar way, right? So let's just go ahead and start tracking forward. So we're going to call this, we're actually going to name our layers right quick. We're going to call this bottom jacket. We're going to call this top jacket. We're going to call this right arm, even though it's his left arm, and we're going to call this left arm because it's our left. Okay? And now we're just going to leave this on the default translation, scale, rotation, and shear. I actually recommend that you do not turn perspective on when you are tracking roto. And the reason for that is when you're tracking roto, what can happen is if you use perspective, a lot of times people move a lot, you know, like they move a lot. And if you track perspective, sometimes it can really throw your track off. Give me 1 second. I'm going to adjust something over here. Yeah, we're just going to mute Peter. There we go. All right. Now, let's go ahead and start tracking forward. All right, so we have, you can see that Mocha's doing a pretty good job of just sticking to the area where we want our shapes to stick. The cool thing about this is I can actually use the PixelChooser to further refine this mat. I don't want to do a whole lot of articulated mat. I want to do something that is going to save me time. So in this case, I'm making a bunch of garbage mats that I'm then going to use a keyer to sort of pull the finer points out of. The reason I do that is because I don't actually want to come in here and roto the edges of all of this really, really nicely. So we're going to let this track. We're going to do some corrections to make sure that our guy is completely inside of these shapes at all time. And then we're going to just quickly adjust the PixelChooser to get the area to color correct that we want. Now, you can see this goes by pretty fast, even though this is a fairly long shot. And I probably should have tracked this from the beginning to the end, but because he was so large in frame anyway, it's not going to really matter that much. And I kind of wanted to get the bottom half of him without cutting it off. Now let's just let that finish tracking, and we're going to do some corrections. Okay, so now we're going to just adjust our roto shapes. And what you're going to find that's really neat is that Mocha is actually going to tween between the corrections I make and the track that I have. So let's just come in here and correct that. Let's pull this out a little bit. Now when we start tracking backwards, let's go ahead and adjust his hip shape here to get the lapel inside of it. And we'll adjust his cuff there as well. Adjust this. And we're going to pull this out. Now, a cool thing I want to point out about these tools is you can actually use the auto stabilize tool, quick stabilize mode. What this will do is this will actually hold your shape in one place based on the track, and you can tell really quickly if your guy is coming out of your shape or not. So this is a really fast and easy way to correct your roto without having to scroll through the shot over and over and maybe miss something. It's just a different way to look at something. In the same way that an artist will take their painting and they will turn it upside down so that they can see better. This is that kind of thing, except for this just pins it in the middle, and you can see all your data moving within your shape so that you can correct your shape over time. So now that we have this really nice roto, well, really nice garbage mat, excuse me, because it's not really nice roto, we're going to go ahead and hit save and close. And now what we can do is we can actually go inside of our PixelChooser and we can select our mat. And inside of our mat, we can go ahead and select Luma. And we can go ahead and go to mat type. And we can go to, I want to say threshold. Which one is it? I want to say it's range. We can actually select the range that we want to pull from, and so as we change our hue, let's just go ahead and change our hue, we can adjust where our hue goes. So in this case, we're going to make like a 20 hue change, and we're going to take our saturation down a little bit, just like this. And now we're actually going to take our mask, and inside of our mask, we're going to increase our feather a little bit, so we have a nice fall off. And what we're going to do is we're going to end up with some really nice color correction really quickly without having to do a whole ton of work. So let's just look at the difference there for a second. And it sort of changes the whole vibe of the shot. So this is an important tool for storytelling where you can just change the color on the fly without having to just pull a key. Now, let's move right along to something a little more complicated because we all understand roto. Now, you can obviously do a much nicer job of articulating this roto. Like on this version, I think I actually did a much nicer roto. Let's just hit cancel for a second. Let's go to hue, saturation, and lightness. Nice. We're just going to have a problem there. It's a bug. So what I was going to show you the finer roto, but we're not going to worry about it. We're going to move on to our corner pin. So with our corner pin, what we're going to do is we're going to actually take this green screen and we're going to put a new screen on top of it. So how we're going to do that is we're going to first do a track on this phone. Now, in order to complete this track, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my PixelChooser. Right. We're going to go to BCC PixelChooser. This is actually how you create a mask inside of an editing program without having to rely on an effect for that mask. But in this case, we're actually going to use the PixelChooser to get our tracking data. I'm just going to visually turn this off, and inside of Mocha, I'm going to hit launch. Now I've got my shot load it into Mocha, and we're going to track the screen. The thing about tracking in Mocha is we actually need to track translation, shear, rotation, and scale on this. So we're just going to go ahead and track the entire phone because this is actually a really small phone. Now, if this had a lot of reflection on the phone, which it doesn't, but if this did have a lot of reflection, what you would actually do is you would use the Add to X-Spline tool, and I'm going to turn my mat on so you can see what this does. And we would cut out the middle part of the phone. The reason we would do that is because the reflection can actually throw our tracking data off, but we're not going to worry about that because there is no reflection data there. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take our surface tool and we are going to align our surface tool to our screen just like this. Now, the reason we align our surface tool is because this is where we want our corner pin to be. So I'm going to take my surface tool, align it. We're going to track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective, and we're going to call this phone track. Okay, and let's hit track backwards. And even though this is tracking off screen, Mocha is going to do its best to hold on. So we're going to let this get to nearly off screen, and then we're going to move to tracking one frame at a time. So it's nearly off screen, but I don't like the way it's tilting because you see I have perspective on and it's actually judging that perspective is just a little too much. So we're going to switch perspective off. We're going to track one frame at a time, and then we're just going to switch to translation only, and we're going to let this track off screen. You can see it tracks really nicely off screen, but I think we're missing just a little bit here. So we're going to turn shear back on for those frames and go track, 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 track. And the nice thing about that is it allows me to track over my data over and over again. Now, one of the things that I'm going to point out here is that we haven't gotten this completely off screen. We did when we just used translation only, but unfortunately I don't like the way that looked. So obviously we had to turn shear and perspective back on. Now, this is the thing about tracking data. You can massage it all day long. You're not stuck with just what you get in automation. So what I want to point out is that we can actually come over here and go to our manual track. Let's just turn on manual track. And what I want you to notice is that my surface tool changes when I go to manual track. So large motion, it's one blue line. Manual track, it's a dotted line. We're going to go ahead and add a keyframe here. Let's just go ahead and adjust this. All right, and now what we can do is we can start to adjust our track off screen if we like. Now I feel like that's pretty accurate. What you're seeing here on the edges is actually motion blur, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But what I want to adjust is here. So let's go ahead and bring this off screen. And you can see we have a much nicer track now. All right, so what do we do with this? Well, first, we hit play, and we check and make sure this looks correct. We go back to large motion, and I want to make sure that our surface tool is actually all the way over our green lines. Okay, because if it's not all the way over the green area, we're going to have a problem when we put our corner pin back in. Let's adjust our surface tool to make sure it's exactly where we want it. And let's scrub through. And again, we can also turn our auto stabilize mode on to really check it, because that will hold it in place. Okay, that looks good to me. So now I'm going to save this. I'm going to export my tracking data, and we're going to do BCC corner pin. And I'm going to save this. We're going to save this as a BCC corner pin. Hit save. We're going to write over it and close. So what about the image I want to put onto my timeline? Well, we're going to come over here to our media browser, our project, and we're going to go to our phone screen. We're going to drag this and drop this right onto our timeline. I'm going to drag this to the layer under, and the reason I'm doing that is only because this layer is turned off and I don't want to see this layer. So I'm going to select my top layer, and we're going to go to our BCC corner pin. We take our BCC corner pin and we drag and drop it right onto our timeline. Inside of the BCC corner pin, I need to select my background. My background right now is set at video 3, which is correct, okay, because this is the layer I'm on, video 3. Now, the corner pin needs to be video 2, and you can see there's my corner pin, but I haven't applied my data. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our motion tracker. Down in our motion tracker, we're going to hit load. On our desktop, we're going to hit BCC corner text, and we're going to go ahead and open this. And now it has applied my corner pin to my footage. But we don't have motion blur checked on, so how do we solve that? Well, it's really easy. We actually go to turn motion blur on, check. Okay, great. Inside of motion blur, we can actually adjust our phase angle so that it lines up correctly. We can go to smoothest, okay, and we can make sure our shutter angles look correct. So in this case, let's just go ahead and increase that. In this case, we now have our motion blur applied to our corner pin, and when you render it, you'll get something that looks really nice, just like this. So that's a pretty simple thing to do as well. Moving right along, let's talk about how to track effects into a shot. In this case, what we've got is we've got some lightning effects happening in these clouds using a couple of effects from the Boris toolset. So let's talk about that. We have a fast film process to change the color. Okay, we have a BCC PixelChooser to get our tracking data. We have the BCC lens flare 3D to get the cloud lens flare, and then we also have on these two little sections, we have BCC lightning. And what that does is that actually adds lightning to our shot. So let's go ahead and select our layer, and let's get started on tracking effects into this shot. It's actually pretty simple. So again, we're going to go to our BCC PixelChooser. We're going to drag and drop this right onto our timeline. Visually, we're going to turn it off because we don't actually need that data. And we're going to go to Mocha. Inside of Mocha, I'm going to track these clouds back here. And again, there's not a lot of point and feature data back here, and I think that's really important to point out. Now let's go ahead and arrange our center point here. You see these little crosshairs? We're aligning these crosshairs to the cloud where we want our lens flare to be, because we're going to add a lens flare to this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make sure that we just have translation, scale, and rotation on, because we don't actually need shear for this. And we're going to go ahead and hit track forward. Let's turn our surface tool, make sure our surface tool on, turn our grid on, and let's hit track forward. And you can see that even though there's subtle motion in these clouds, Mocha's following along really nicely. And we're zooming, and we've got this nice sweep. Let's just scrub back and forth. And we've really followed that without having to do a whole lot of work. Now, if this were just sitting still in the middle of the shot, it would look like it was sliding. So it's really important to get tracking data for these sorts of shots, even if they are subtle, because viewers are actually getting way more sophisticated and they will see it. So we're going to export our tracking data, and we're going to do a BCC center point, and we're going to save this, and I'm going to save this as lens flare. We're going to save this right onto our desktop or wherever you would want to save it. Obviously, the desktop is not a sanitary place to save it. You could save it to whatever your project file is, but in this case, I'm just saving it to my desktop so I can get there quickly for the purposes of this demo. We're going to save this and close it. And now we're going to come in here to our BCC lens, and we're going to do BCC lens flare 3D. We're going to drag and drop this right onto our timeline. And we're going to launch our effects browser. Excuse me. Let me close my PixelChooser. We're going to launch our effects browser in the lens flare 3D. So inside of lens flare 3D, you can see that our artists at the BCC headquarters have gone ahead and made several options here for you to choose from. We're going to actually, I think, use a preset. Let's see. Which one do I want to use? I think I want to use, let's try this one, because this is nice and fat. And we're going to go ahead and hit apply. And now what we can do is we can actually change the flicker on this. So let's add our light flicker, and let's add some flicker to this, just like that, so we get a little bit of pulsing. I'm going to increase the speed of that flicker because this is lightning, just like that. All right, and now we're going to apply the tracking data to our effect. So we're going to go down here to our motion tracker, and we're going to load our data. Desktop, lens flare, open. And we're going to take our data and we're actually going to apply it to our object. Let's just go ahead and make sure that this is working. There you go. It applies it automatically, just like that. And so now we have our lens flare moving correctly with our shot. So another thing I want to do is I want to change the color scale, the color, not the color scale, the color look of this. So we're going to go to BCC and we're going to type in fast film. And we're going to grab BCC fast film process. We're going to drop it right onto our timeline here. I'm going to drag it underneath my lens flare. And inside my fast film process, I'm going to pick a good stormy look. And there's a couple of things to pick from, but I'm going to pick color push and hit apply. All right, and so now we've got our fast film process and our glow over the top. We end up with this really nice effect. And then it's just a matter of adding BCC lightning, which in this case, we just go to BCC, we'll just go type in lightning. Only we spell it right. So we have BCC lightning, and what we can do is we can actually copy and paste this and cut it into the sections where we want our lightning. Now the reason we copy and paste that is because the lightning will actually respect the length of the footage and will animate based on that. So in order to get those effects, we just cut it, we drag our BCC lightning, and we find a look that we like inside of the effects browser. It's pretty simple. And then just to show you right quick, because I don't want to redo this because we're running out of time, is you basically set a source and a destination. So you just click on your BCC lightning and you can see here's your source, here's your destination, and we have all sorts of on-screen controls to change the looks on the fly so that you don't have to rely on sliders over here. Very, very fast and easy. Now, we can also do this very same thing for particles. So if you need to add particles or text to a shot, with the BCC text, we've actually just gone ahead and made a, let's come in here. We've made a little pre-comp. It's basically, what's what you would call a pre-comp inside of After Effects, which is actually, let's select our footage. And what you actually do is you go to make subsequence, okay? And you end up with this little green subsequence, and you can apply a corner pin to that. So in this case, what we did is we took our sequence, we applied some Boris type on text to it, and we corner pinned it right into the shot using the same technique that we did for the phone. What I want to point out though is how to apply this to a particle system for the purposes of this demo. With the particle system, what we've got is we've actually got an entire 3D system that you can actually use some 2D data to drive inside of your shot. So let's talk about how to do that. Let's take our footage and let's come over here to our effects. And let's do BCC particles. And we're going to do, as you can see, we have a BCC particle emitter 3D. So we're going to go to BCC particle emitter 3D, and we're going to drag and drop this right on to, well, excuse me, we're going to copy this and paste it. And let's go to the end of our shot here. Excuse me. Let's zoom out so I can see what I'm doing. Paste, and we're going to drag this back over the top for footage. And we're going to take our BCC particle emitter 3D and drag it on top of that. The reason we actually do that is because if we do not drag our particle system on top, what we'll end up with is a blank piece of footage, because the particle system actually takes over for that piece of footage, so it's always best to duplicate what you're putting it on. Let's go ahead and pick something in the effects browser that we like. I ended up picking, I want to say, a basic spawn burst. And with this, excuse me, let's go to actually a different one. I want, let's see, I don't want snowfall. Let's see about this one. That's a boom. That's a data wave. That's default. Yeah, let's just do the basic spawn burst right quick. Okay, so we have our spawn burst. And what I actually want to do is I want to come into my emitter, and we can actually adjust the particle lifespan. We can also pre-seed it so that it actually will have been generating the particles not just at the beginning of this, but for a while. So if we pre-run it, obviously you can have your particles already going. Now, one of the things I want to point out about this particle system is actually, if you look, it's sliding over the surface of what of our shot. And the reason it's sliding over the surface is because the actual shot itself is handheld, and if we don't match, then we're going to have a problem. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to take our BCC PixelChooser. Okay, we're going to grab our BCC PixelChooser. We're going to drag this onto our original footage. Okay, visually we're going to turn it off. We're going to launch Mocha, and I'm actually going to track this blurry background. Now, a blurry background should not actually be easy to track, but because we're actually tracking the texture, it's pretty easy to track. We're just going to turn our surface tool on, and we're going to have our particle system start here, and we're going to track this forward. And you can see that even though this is really blurry and there's not really a lot of hard points to track, because we're tracking the entire texture, Mocha doesn't care, follows it right through the shot. We're going to go to export tracking data. We're going to do a BCC center point. We're going to save. We're going to call this particle. And we're going to just save this right to the desktop again, which again is not a sanitary workflow. Save it to your project folder. And we're going to save this and close it. And now inside of my particle system, we can go down to our transform particle. And we can go to, I'm sorry, transform system. Where is it? One second. Let's see where I put it. So inside of our particle system, we're going to, let me scroll this up a little bit. Particle emitter 3D. I lost my transform. And let's go to our tracker. And inside of our tracker, we're going to go to load, and we're going to go to our desktop. We're going to select particles. And now it should follow. You can see that it's following our track here at the top. So that's how you actually make particles feel like they fit within the world. When you apply them, you actually, in this case, I applied it to the system positive X and Y. And what it does is it actually applies the particles to the entire shot. Now, let's talk a little bit about Beauty Studio. So the other thing about Mocha inside of the BCC 10 tools is it allows you to have a lot of control over where you're applying your effects. And that we showed that a little bit in the color correction, but what I actually want to do is I want to show this inside of a more complex shot. So this shot, this is a beautiful woman. I mean, she's extremely pretty, but what we want to do is we actually want to adjust her skin complexion. She has great complexion, but cameras are just unkind. So you can, if you look really closely, and I don't know if this is going to come through in the compression, but you can see she's a human being with veins in her skin, and like this lighting is a little bit harsh on her skin, so we want to soften that up. So let's come over here and let's look at the difference that applying Beauty Studio does to clean up the lighting on her arm, soften her arm, and soften the details in her legs. Okay, what we're going to do is we're only going to apply the softening to her legs and her arms. So let's select our original footage. And let's come in here and let's go to BCC Beauty Studio. Inside of Beauty Studio, we're going to drag and drop this right onto our timeline. And we're going to select her arms and legs inside of our PixelChooser. So again, you can see we have our Launch Mocha button. And again, you can see the difference between this and the plugin that's coming out is we only have the Clip, Track, and Adjust Track tab. We're going to go to our Track tab, zoom out just a little bit. We're going to turn our thumbnails off because sometimes those get in the way. And we're going to draw a big garbage mat right around her arm. I'm going to soften this shape, and we're going to draw a big garbage mat right around her legs, and I'm going to soften the curve of that shape as well. So we're going to call this legs, we're going to call this arms, and we're going to go ahead and hit track forward. And Alchemy Effects provided this footage for us. But what we're doing is we're going to just soften these hard lines using our large detail smoothness. And we're going to adjust our roto here at the bottom as her leg comes up into frame. So the reason we're doing this is because if I just pull a key here, there's a lot of bounced light from all this white around them. And this white bounces into her skin tone. So when you use a keyer, there's not much difference between this tone and this tone. It looks like there is, but that's actually just your eyes playing tricks on you because of the darker colors that are here and here. But all of this is bounced gray and white from this background. So if we don't actually localize this part of the shot, what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with blowing away all this nice hard detail in the background. We don't want to do that. So let us correct our roto just a little bit. So we've got some nice corrected roto. And we're going to hit save, and we're going to hit close. Okay, and now inside of our effects browser, we can find a base for our Beauty Studio. We can do like small, strong details, or we can find a look that we like. But in this case, I'm actually going to go ahead and hit apply on default. We're going to go into smoothing. And I want to point out a couple of things. We can actually sharpen up the area as well if we want, but unfortunately, that actually is not what we want to do. So we're just going to smooth small details. We're going to smooth everything. And we're going to come in here to our PixelChooser, and we're going to actually adjust our matte a little bit. So inside of our matte, we're going to select her skin tone. And you can see that's a little bit over smoothed. So we want to go into our master amount, and we want to take the master smoothing down. Let's take small details down a little bit and medium details down a little bit. And now what you can see is we have some really nice smoothing on her skin without blowing away all the detail in her face, without blowing away all this good detail in the background. So let's go ahead and look at how that looks final. It looks really smooth and it looks really natural. And that's the thing about beauty work, is you should never notice that beauty work has been done. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is a preview for a new tool we have coming out. So one of the cool things about teaming up with the Boris team, since our merger last year, is that the BCC guys are really good at making open effects tools. So what we've done is we've teamed up with them to make Mocha Pro into a plugin that will plug in right on your timeline, and you don't have to load and save footage. So in this shot, what we're doing is we're just going to remove this guy from the scene. And we're doing that for an effects pass. But normally this is a task that takes a long time to hand create. The other thing about this is a lot of times our users were having to save the footage out as like an EXR or a TIFF, and then they were having to load it into an external version of Mocha, and they were having to do the roto, inside of that package, and then render it out, bring it back in, match the grain to the render, composite it with masks and all kinds of stuff that people didn't want to have to do. So we've taken the steps for that, and we've actually cut a lot of those out. So let's talk about Mocha Pro, the plugin. Let's just type in Mocha Pro, and you can see right here in my effects, I have Mocha Pro, and I'm going to drag it and drop it right onto my timeline. Okay, now we're just going to hit Launch Mocha. And some of you fans of Mocha are going to notice that we have the Clip tab, the Lens tab, the Track tab, Adjust Track, our Camera Solver. We have an Insert, Remove, and Stabilize all here inside of the Mocha Pro plugin. Now, just like I did in the previous shot that had blanking, I'm going to drag this blanking down so that Mocha is not looking at this section. And we're going to go to our Track tab. Inside of our Track tab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a mask around the guy I want to remove, and we're going to remove him automatically from the scene without having to do paint work, without having to do the remover, without having to do any offsets, none of that, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to just really quickly I'm going to just draw a really quick mask around the top of this guy for tracking purposes. We're going to go ahead and track this off screen. Okay, and now I'm going to use my Uber key, and we're going to, we're going to pull this shape down to encompass his legs. And let's use the Add Points to Spline tool to increase some of the points we have on the spline. All right, and now we can just simply animate this. I'm going to use my Auto Stabilize tool. I'm going to turn my thumbnails off. We're going to keep him in the middle of the shot. We're just going to make sure that he's always within these shapes, just like this. We're going to make sure our auto key is on, though, and not our Uber key, because that's going to cause us some problems. All right, there we go. All right, we're going to correct this shape and correct this. And let's just fix this. Now, the reason this doesn't track perfectly is because I'm actually tracking a multiplanar object in one single shape, which you normally don't want to do, but because this is the garbage matte, I don't care. And the reason for that is garbage mats are not meant to be fully articulated, really nice roto. If you try to treat them like that, obviously you're going to be a little frustrated. But let's just go ahead and track this off screen. Doing well. Okay, and then there we are. We're just going to bump this off. Just like that, and then we're going to pull this right off screen. All right, so it looks like my guy is always inside my shape, and you notice I've made a really loose shape around my guy I'm trying to remove. The reason I made a loose shape is because look at how much motion blur he has on him. If I leave that blur on the background, Mocha's going to think it's part of the shot. So now we're going to call this guy remove. Now we're going to take our gear and we're going to turn that off because it's the action item in Mocha. It means we're tracking. We're going to lock this layer. I'm not going to lock it actually. I'm just going to leave it alone. And now we're going to track our background shape. Now what we're actually doing is we are tracking this background data in order to replace all of the foreground data in front of it. So let's take this and call it background. And you notice I moved it underneath my guy. The reason I did that is inside of Mocha, and this is all versions of Mocha, the top layer will always be held out from the layers beneath it, okay, and so on and so forth. So if you track from the foreground to the background and stack them from the top of the layer pile to the bottom of the layer pile, you will always have holdout mats for everything you're tracking inside of Mocha. We're going to turn our surface tool on so we can see how this is tracking. We're just going to go ahead and let this track backwards. Now what is really important is that this track is really good, because our remove is only going to be as good as our track. So we're going to select our guy remove. We're going to go to our remove tab. We're going to make sure that we're selected on his layer. I'm going to turn my overlays off so you can really see what's going on here. And in fact, let's just go ahead and make this as large in screen as we can so you can really see. And now we're going to hit render backwards. What Mocha is going to do is it's going to use that small shape that I created, and it's going to look in the larger shape and look at the tracking data in order to replace the object automatically. Now, here's the cool part. Normally, when you render this out, you have to render it out and then load it back in. We're going to hit save and close. We're going to take our apply matte and turn it off. Inside of our module renders, we're going to turn renders on, and we're going to look at our remove render. And now what you'll see is we have our remove render right inside of our comp. Well, not our comp, our edit. So this is normally a task that would be kind of a pain, and we've simplified it. And now anything that works inside of the Mocha Pro software actually is going to work as a plugin inside of your timeline. And that includes working for Nuke, that includes working inside of After Effects, that includes working inside of Premiere, that includes working inside of Avid. We're really excited to announce this, guys. So stay tuned for this. It is not out yet. I'm showing a technology preview. This should be coming up right around NAB, so definitely stay tuned for that. If you guys have any questions, I am happy to go over any problems or things that you didn't understand about this demo. We're so glad that you tuned in, and I'm going to kick this back over to Jesse. In theory.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
No worries.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to mention a couple things. I want to mention who the winners of the raffle prizes are. Congratulations to Diana Hyatt, who has won the BCC 10 one-year subscription for the multi-host option. And congratulations to James Reinhardt, who has won the Mocha Pro license. I'll be sending both of you emails shortly. And I also just want to mention, I put it in the chat window, but from now until April 5th, you can save 10% on BCC 10, all options, upgrades, and new versions. And the web discount for the store is web as in webinar, MAR as in March, and 16 as in 2016.